Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Pringle. I'm the New Jersey Campaign Director for Clean Water Action, and I'm happy to facilitate the press conference today, but really there are two folks especially that deserve all the time and attention here. Today we are announcing the introduction of a major piece of environmental legislation to ensure that people have the right to clean air and clean water in New Jersey. You would think we already have that right, but as we all know, our air and water isn't clean enough, and we need a constitutional provision like that. There is a comparable provision in the Pennsylvania Constitution, long dormant, but thanks to a lawsuit by the Delaware Riverkeeper a few years ago, it became very alive. And Maya van Rossum, the Delaware Riverkeeper and Executive Director of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, was responsible for that lawsuit and had the brilliant idea of why not just Pennsylvania, how about everywhere else? And the first state she thought of was New Jersey, and we work in close coordination along with Sierra Club and Environment New Jersey. So we started brainstorming, and we thought there was no better person to champion this in the legislature than Tim Eustace, Assemblyman and Chair of the Environment Committee. We thank him for wanting to do this. I think we first sat down only a couple months ago, and today is the very first assembly session since that meeting, and I think it's great that he chose to have the first thing for him to introduce with the legislature back being this legislation. So without further ado, Assemblyman Eustace.
Thank you, Dave. Well, I thank the advocates for being here, and I thank my colleagues in the Assembly, and I do have to mention that Assemblywoman-elect Carol Murphy is here. We have great support for this, and unfortunately it's taken a long time, but we're talking about an environmental Bill of Rights. We're talking about a bill that would guarantee every person has a right to clean and healthy environment here in the state of New Jersey. Sounds like something that's absolute common sense and something we all wanted. This is a state where there's something we have to fight for. With the climate in Washington, we have to make sure New Jersey protects itself. We have more Superfund sites than any state in the country. As the EPA is dismantled, we need to protect ourselves. I'm going to say it over and over and over again as I remain environmental chair, and that is New Jersey needs to protect itself and our environment. This is a way to do that. A constitutional amendment that ensures New Jersey has a stake in making sure we have clean air and water and forests and everything we need to sustain this state for the future. There are two provisions in the bill, the first of which makes sure that the state guarantees that any action on development protects the environment. The second gives ownership to the citizens of the state of New Jersey to their environment, clean air, clean water, clean environment. That's simply it. I'm going to ask the rest of the speakers to stand up, especially Maya, the Delaware Riverkeeper, who spearheaded this. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Conference
Thank you.
Leader Sumter. Yeah, I apologize.
Thank you. Thank you, Assemblyman Eustace, Chair, to our neighbors in Delaware, to Dave, to my fellow colleagues in the Assembly. For us, it's important that we protect our environment for not only our future, but our children's future. Too often we allow those issues to go by the wayside, but what type of earth are we leaving behind for the next generations? And this is one way to protect that earth, to make sure that we have clean space, that we have environmentally friendly space, that we also have the inhabitants that not only include the humans, but also includes our animals and wildlife in the state of New Jersey. So let's continue to work to make sure that we have clean air, clean water, one of the fundamental rights that we all should have access to, not just for some, but for all. And thank you, Assemblyman, for taking on this issue and inviting me to join you.
Thank you, Conference Leader. Next is Co-Prime, Assemblywoman Nancy Pinkett.
Thank you. Well, I thank you so much, Assemblyman Eustace, for bringing up this issue. And I commend Pennsylvania for doing it in 1971. It's too bad we didn't think of it before that. But when you think of the environmental issues, when we talk about legislation, we talk about economic development, we talk about making choices on all of these things, we frequently have not thought of protecting the individuals and our land and our resources. So when we think about things like Agent Orange, originally people didn't think it was any big deal. They were using it. Now we have to deal with the cost of all of the military that have been exposed to Agent Orange. When we look at Love Canal, when we look at cigarettes, now we look at the cost to everybody for smoking cigarettes and the damage that that has caused. When we look at the cost of Roundup, people are putting that on the ground, and yet we're not looking at the incredible harm that has been happening to that property. When we look at lead in the water and lead in the paint, we just talked about the number of schools and the number of townships that have many children that are contaminated by that lead. The cost, we have to start doing the cost-benefit analysis of how that impacts our future. So that is also the other economic side. When we're talking about trying to sustain or trying to deal with kids that are going to live into adulthood with long-term learning disabilities, there's a huge cost to that. So when we do, I think part of the, I'm speculating that in Pennsylvania, they use that to compare that analysis to show why it's important to invest in that consideration when you're looking at legislation or you're looking at economic development, so that we are taking that into consideration. So when we talk about cancers, asthma, those human costs are having a huge impact on our budget. Well, and it's not always an evil plot. Sometimes at the time when we talked about asbestos or some other things, we didn't necessarily know what the consequences would be. But there are many things that we do know about, and we have to be sure that we're protecting our state budget, that we're protecting the human lives that we're responsible for. So thank you so much again, Assemblyman, for taking up this really, really critical issue.
Thank you, Assemblywoman.
Great.
And now I'd like to introduce the author of the Just Out Green Amendment, and I can say this even if she shouldn't, available on Amazon.com.
So I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I really am so excited to be here because I think that today is going to prove to be a historic first step for the state of New Jersey in protecting people's right to a healthy environment, in protecting our rights to clean water, to clean air, to healthy food grown in healthy soils, to protect our rights not to be subjected to dangerous toxins and the other harms that come with environmental devastation. With the proposal of this amendment, New Jersey truly is poised to become a leader in recognizing and protecting environmental rights. If this amendment passes into the Constitution, New Jersey would become one of only 3 states that recognizes and protects environmental rights as an inalienable, self-executing right in the Bill of Rights section of the state constitution. Right now, the only 2 states that do that are Pennsylvania and Montana. So New Jersey could become number 3 nationwide. If this constitutional amendment is passed, it will give the rights to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment the highest level of protection you can get under New Jersey law. It will raise up the right to clean water and air and a healthy environment to be on par with the other fundamental freedoms that the people of New Jersey expect and hold dear. Things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, private property rights, the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. If passed, it will ensure that the right to clean water and air and a healthy environment is recognized as an inalienable right, not just for the people who are here today, but for the generations yet to come. It will make clear that environmental rights must be honored and protected by every government official at every level of government in the state of New Jersey. Now, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, as David mentioned, secured and advanced constitutional recognition of environmental rights in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And we secured that recognition in December of 2013 as the result of litigation that we brought. After that success, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network started a new initiative called For the Generations, which is about going across the nation and inspiring every state to pass a constitutional environmental rights amendment that protects the right to a healthy environment as an inalienable right in the Bill of Rights for the generations here today and those yet to come. There is a provision that's being talked about and advanced in New York. There's discussion in Maryland. There's discussion in Florida. But as I said, if New Jersey, this is the best proposal that we're seeing, and if this advances, if this is passed, New Jersey will be then one of only 3. So this is really critically important. As David said, anybody who wants to learn more about this issue, there is the book, The Green Amendment, and really goes into detail to describe how our environmental laws are failing us, and how and why a constitutional provision, constitutional protection really makes a meaningful difference when it comes to protecting people's healthy lives and the right to a healthy environment. Given that we all depend upon clean water, clean air, and a healthy environment to support and sustain our lives, this proposed amendment is not only appropriate, but it's necessary, and it's long overdue here in the state of New Jersey. And I really want to thank Assemblyman Eustace for his vision in advancing this proposed amendment at such a critical time in New Jersey's history and in the history of our nation. And I want to thank Assemblywoman Pinkin and Assemblywoman Sumter for also seeing the power and the importance of this provision. I want to thank David Pringle, who very quickly jumped on board with me to identify Assemblyman Eustace as the right champion to help us advance this provision quickly. David has been fundamentally important. And I want to thank New Jersey Sierra Club and Environment New Jersey, who also quickly have joined our ranks in supporting the advancement of a constitutional right, an inalienable right, to a healthy environment here in the state of New Jersey.
And, Jamie Sakaria from the Sierra Club.
Thank you. We want to thank the Assemblyman and Maya for creating and introducing this important legislation and for inviting us to be a part of the battle. Basically, I'm going to reiterate what everyone said. It's the basic right of citizens throughout the world to have clean air and clean water and a healthy planet. Maybe in some places they can't do anything to make it happen, but here in New Jersey we can, and that's what this is about. We can adopt this constitutional amendment that guarantees those rights to every single person living here and to the generations to come. People's right to clean air and water should always come before a gas company's desire to drill or an industry's need to poison communities so they can make more money. We have the right to preserve the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of our environment while also protecting our public health and safety. The people of New Jersey have showed us time and again that they value these clean air and clean water. They've spoken out against Christie's Exxon sellout, fought offshore drilling, pipelines, power plants, spoken out against the denial of climate change that is essentially a denial of our future. The voters have approved funding for open space and dedicating money for environmental settlements. We have no doubt that the people of New Jersey believe in their right to clean air and water, and will support this amendment as well. For far too long, polluters and developers have been getting away with destroying our environment and impacting public health. As Maya said, under the Constitution, we have 4 freedoms, but we need this as a 5th freedom, the freedom to be healthy in a healthy environment. Because after all, you can't have free speech if you can't breathe the air. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any questions?
Sure. What makes this more than just a feel-good piece?
Well, it actually has teeth in that the state is required to do due diligence before they can do development in sensitive areas. So that's the first piece.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by it having teeth, if this becomes part of the Constitution and I'm an industry that may, pollute the air or something, how would this prevent me from doing that?
Well, in the first place, the state would have to do an investigation to make sure that sensitive areas are not being affected, and the second piece is the people have a right to object and litigate.
Well, if I might, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the Pennsylvania case set a precedent that it does have teeth, and that's the point of the legislation.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about any of the other rights protected in the Bill of Rights, if you think about the right to free speech, if government takes actions or allows actions by others that oversteps and infringes on the right to free speech, then the person whose rights have been violated has the right, the legal right, to go straight to court and vindicate those constitutional rights. Same thing for religious freedoms, same thing for private property rights. So in this case, when you have the right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment as described in the constitutional provision, if state government in its decision-making, in its passage of legislation or its implementation of regulations, oversteps and allows activities or creates activities or supports activities that overstep and take from people their rights to a healthy environment, right, then they violated the Constitution. And then you can have a legal challenge. Now, it isn't immediately clear what does it mean to have the right, a constitutional right to a healthy environment, just like it isn't immediately clear what it is to have the right to free speech and freedom of religion, right? We've been litigating those issues for 200 years, But as a result of those 200 years of advocacy, legislation, and litigation, we've got a really solid handle. And just once in a while do we have to have a legal challenge to further define and refine. The same thing's going to happen with this constitutional provision, right? And it's just the moment this becomes a part of the Bill of Rights, an amendment to the Bill of Rights, we can begin to embark on that process of defining here in New Jersey what it means to have a constitutional right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment.
Do any of you believe that as a result of the passage of this amendment, the state would need to change any of its rules or regulations, or the legislature need to pass any new laws in order to be in compliance?
Well, I think,
Go ahead.
This really kind of changes the balance, whether it puts in requiring a cost-benefit analysis of a decision that includes the impact on individuals and on our health and on the environment, where it's not really happening right now when there is a process to determine if there's a new plant coming in, for example. This is not part of that analysis. So it kind of includes more of a cost-benefit analysis, so it tips the tide so that the environmental impact is also considered. So it's adding something that is only considered now after the fact. When they look at the Exxon settlement, if they would have considered this when they were doing that analysis, maybe we wouldn't be where we are today. There's a cost to the state for that, and if there was a settlement and they had a certain amount for cleanup, but the state has to do the rest of the cleanup. So this kind of brings it to be done progressively, to be done proactively rather than retroactively.
And if I can add, we already have agencies charged with doing these tests, so it's a matter of making them actually do what they're supposed to be doing.
What's the enforcement mechanism?
First and foremost, it gives government a better leg to stand on. We all can point to horrible examples of bad decisions government has made. The Newark garbage incinerator is a classic example. It's in the middle of an environmental justice neighborhood that's already, trashed. No pun intended. Since it was built, it shouldn't have been built in the first place. Since it was built, there have been plenty of opportunities to clean up its act, and the state has regularly said they don't have the authority. They would like to require more, but they can't. This gives government the stronger leg to stand on, and it also gives, when government fails to stand on that leg, it gives citizens the opportunity to force them to.
But again, I think the intent is to do it.
Individual lawsuits, is that?
No.
I think, again, the intent is to try to change the dynamic so it's happening proactively, so we can be a more progressive governing body.
As opposed to just doing cleanups.
And in the case of enforcement, I mean, you just have to think about those other constitutional provisions that we've had for centuries and understand how they're enforced. The right to free speech, the right to freedom of religion, private property rights. In the first instance, in the decision-making process, when government is undertaking activities or rendering decisions, they not only think about whether or not their decision is going to comply with the law, but they have to think about whether or not their decision or their action or activity is going to protect constitutional rights. And then after the fact, if there can be demonstrated to be a violation, then yes, you're talking about litigation, right? So just think about those other Bill of Rights protections. And how are they enforced? How are they enacted? How are they protected? The same thing now will happen for the environment, because the environment is now on par with them. It's part of the balancing. It's part of the decision-making process, up front and now after the fact through litigation if necessary.
I think one of the striking things about your book was when it said that physicians were prohibited from saying that there was an impact on the individuals living in the area. And that's where there was no, that should not have happened, and there's going to be a cost to that state for that.
It seems like this would be the Lawyers' Employment Act for the next 50 years, because you don't define what's clean water, you don't define clean air or a healthy environment. So every time a decision of development occurs, it would give the community a right to challenge it based on it's having an impact on clean air, or clean water, or whatever. And I mean, you yourself said it's going to take hundreds. We've had hundreds of years of court cases involving free speech and other basic Bill of Rights. How do you afford that?
Well, I have to say that's an awfully cynical viewpoint of attorneys, but I don't think that people have made their living on free speech issues for the last 200 years. When these issues arise, it's important to stand up for the plaintiff, for the person that's been wronged. And that's one of the things that's the hallmark of this society, that we get to protect citizens' rights. And it's important that we protect all our rights, including in this state, some of the most important things, which are clean air and clean water, because the rest is irrelevant if we don't have that.
You know, and I think, again, this is trying to prevent that. There's already plenty of environmental lawyers working on these issues every day. This is trying to change that dynamic so that we're doing it prospectively, so it's much protecting. Even if I go to court over a child being impacted by lead, that doesn't change the fact that their whole life is now changed. So wouldn't it be better to make sure that they would not be affected by lead rather than worrying about if we're going to court? I think that those things are already happening.
And Tom, I just want to say that that's not the experience in Pennsylvania and Montana, right? You don't have rampant litigation with everybody challenging everything anytime there's a minuscule impact on the environment. That's just not the experience. People recognize that there's a high level in a constitutional challenge situation, right? And so, you know, it is not something where every time somebody spits into the water, you're going to have a piece of litigation. That's just not the experience. It's just not the reality. But also, I think, just as the Assemblywoman said, the fact of the matter is people are losing their lives. They are losing their very lives. They are either dying, becoming incredibly ill. They're losing their ability to work. They're losing the ability to live safely, healthfully, enjoyably in their own homes. They're losing the market value of their homes. They're losing jobs. The economy gets damaged all the way across the state when there's environmental degradation that harms the economy. On the flip side, when you have good environmental protections, we get great economic benefits, and we get great quality of life benefits, and we get great health and safety benefits. So that's really what we need to be looking at. And the fact that you may have somebody bring in an inappropriate, unscrupulous lawsuit shouldn't be an argument against passing a constitutional right to a healthy environment that is literally going to protect people's lives.
In Jeff's absence, I think I'll employ a titleism. There are plenty of unemployed lawyers in Pennsylvania.
Maya, can you pronounce your name just so we all have it correct?
Maya, M-A-Y-A, Van Rossum, lowercase V-A-N, capital R-O-S-S-U-M.
Has the legislation for this been introduced? Does it have a bill number?
It's being introduced today. It'll get a bill number later today.
Anything from incoming leadership in support of this?
Just starting the conversations now publicly.
But I think the fact that we had, you know, three assembly members today, I think is an awesome sign of support.
And that reach out began, I think, yesterday afternoon.
Thanks.
Thank you. Great. Thanks, everyone.